Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, Ambassador Mayerfas, welcome to the Indonesia and the Netherlands Technology Partnership Forum, or INTPF, in 2021. Today, we'll be discussing about carbon tax and trading systems. Can it help to reduce emissions? This webinar is the fifth and also the last webinar for 2021, so it will be a closing one. And it holds in hybrids where we have a number of participants attending live from Utrecht, and also a virtual participation via Zoom, and also live streaming from ECADIN YouTube. First of all, I would like to invite Ambassador of the Republic of Indonesia to the Kingdom of the Netherlands to give his opening remarks. Kepada Bapak Dubes Mayerfas, dimohon untuk dapat menyampaikan remarks-nya.
Di sini. Langsung ya.
Distinguished speaker and moderator, ladies and gentlemen, Bapak Ibu yang terhormat, selamat pagi dari Belanda dan selamat sore untuk Bapak Ibu yang berada di Indonesia. Ada ya? Ada. Good morning from to those attending from here or Netherlands. Thank you very much. In his recent speech during the COP26 in Glasgow, November 2021, the President of the Republic of Indonesia delivered a clear message on Indonesia's contribution and future plan in addressing climate change. President Joko Widodo also mentioned that, and I quote, "In addition, carbon market and carbon pricing must be part of the efforts to address climate change issues. To implement word into action, President Joko Widodo signed the Regulation Number 98/2021 that regulate the economic value of carbon. The regulation introduced result-based payment for initiative that result in carbon reduction as instrument in the carbon trading mechanism. Using the cap and trade system, Indonesia will limit and allow pollution level that can be traded by business entities within the country and cross-border. Under the law about tax regulation harmonization number 7/2021, Indonesia will also begin to implement carbon tax, starting with carbon tax on coal-fired power plant in April 2022. I believe that today's topic of discussion is timely to know more on the development of carbon regulations in Indonesia. In this regard, I welcome the presence of Ibu Farih Indah Harika, policy analyst from the Center for Climate Finance and Multilateral Policy, Ministry of Finance of Indonesia. Bapak, Ibu, ladies and gentlemen, the Netherlands, as a member of the European Union, has been implementing the European Union Emission Trading System, introduced since 2005. The EU ETS is currently the largest greenhouse gas emission trading system in the world. The Netherlands Industry Carbon Tax Act is also scheduled to enter into force on January 1st, 2021. During the early phase of carbon market and tax system in Indonesia, I believe that sharing experiences of Netherlands and their strategy could provide valuable input with additional expectation that the discussion could explore a future stronger bilateral cooperation in this area. In this regard, I welcome the presence of Mr. Paul van Baal, Senior Policy Advisor, Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Policy of the Netherlands. I look forward to know more on the progress, achievement, and challenges of the implementation of EU ETS in the Netherlands, including the preparation to implement the Netherlands carbon tax. Bapak, Ibu, and ladies and gentlemen, one of the most important actors in implementing carbon tax and carbon trade and tax is the business entities. They play a key role in ensuring that the carbon policies can be implemented and could achieve the target to reduce emission. In this connection, I would like to welcome Mr. Richard Middle, Manager Strategic Business Development of Groningen Seaports, and Bapak Yusuf Didi Sutiarto, Director of Human Resources Management of PLN. I do hope that the presence of the business entities could complete the discussion from the business perspective, especially on the role and contribution of renewable and sustainable energy to the carbon emission trade system. Bapak, Ibu, ladies and gentlemen, today's webinar is the fifth and the last event of the year 2021 under Indonesia-Netherlands Technology Partnership Forum, INTPF, a collaboration project between the Embassy of Republic of Indonesia in The Hague, Bandung Institute of Technology Alumni Network, Netherlands Chapter, and Energy Academy Indonesia. The theme of this year is bridging the gap and harnessing sustainable energy. INTPF is initiative to support the bilateral relationship between Indonesia and the Netherlands, especially the technology partnership, cooperation, and investment. During the challenging year of 2021 due to the pandemic, I highly value the program of INTPF to continue to explore the share of knowledge on technology, especially on the renewable and sustainable energy between both countries. Taking this opportunity, I would also like to mention that one of the priorities of Indonesia during its current G20 presidency is transition to sustainable energy. Therefore, while expressing my gratitude to the INTPF committee, I would like to also extend my wish and that INTPF could continue to play a strategic role in bridging the technological transfer, cooperation, and investment to support Indonesia transition to sustainable energy. In closing, I would like to welcome Ibu Mutia Prameswari Rohimans as the moderator of today's seminar, and I wish everyone a fruitful discussion. Terima kasih. Thank you.
Terima kasih Bapak Dubes. As the ambassadors mentioned, that Indonesia and the Netherlands Technology Partnership Forum is a cooperation between Indonesian Embassy in The Hague, Bandung Technology Institute Alumni Chapter Netherlands, and also with the support of ECADIN. And as also mentioned by ambassadors, that we aim to enhance the bilateral relationships, especially in energy sectors, for investments and also technology transfers. And today we are going to discuss about the carbon tax and trading systems, whether it's by Indonesian perspective and also Netherlands perspective. And here I will also invite Ibu Mutia Kusma Preswari as our moderator for today. So Ibu Mutia is a professional at Shell, and her role currently focus on industrial sectors, decarbonization and cleaner energy solutions. So she is the perfect person as a moderator today. And prior to that, she also works in the gas and LNG trading business of Shell. I would also like to invite Mr. Paul van Baal, Senior Policy Advisor from the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Policy, and Mr. Richard Middle, Manager Strategic Business Development from Groningen Seaports, the Netherlands. We also have Ibu Verika Indah Arika, from Policy Analyst from Ministry of Finance, as also representative from the PLN, which is a state-owned electricity company. So Ibu Mutia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mbak Raisa. Please have a seat. Thanks, everyone. Good morning. How are you? Thank you very much for coming here, and good morning for everyone in here. Selamat siang, selamat sore for people joining from Indonesia. Welcome to the fifth session of INTPF 2021. INTPF is Indonesia-Netherlands Technology Partnership Forum, and today we're going to have a discussion on carbon tax and emission trading system. My name is Mutia, as has been mentioned by the MC and also Mr. Ambassador, and I'm very honored to be here with all the distinguished speakers, and I'll be your moderator for today. And as explained by the MC, I'm a professional working in an energy company in the Netherlands, and today I'm here in my capacity as one of ITB alumni, so all my questions, views do not represent the views of my employer. Before we start, let's do some housekeeping. We will have two sessions. The first session will focus mainly on the Netherlands experience from you, also the policy, more explanation about what actually ETS is, right? And what is actually Netherlands, the Netherlands carbon tax. And also we will hear from the industry player. Here we have Mr. Richard, will give us his experience working in Groningen Seaports, listening from first-hand industry experience, how carbon tax and also ETS are being implemented. And also, I would like to highly encourage you to take part throughout the session. So for those of you who are joining online, please feel free to put your question in YouTube chat or also in Zoom chat. And for those of you who are joining here in our Q&A session, if you have any question, please raise your hand and then please come forward to the microphone, and then we will take your question from there. So I hope that's clear. Without further ado, let me introduce you the speaker for today. Next to me, we have our first speaker, Mr. Paul van Baal. Hi, Paul, how are you?
Hi, I'm very good.
Thank you for
Happy to be
coming.
here.
Thank you for coming. So Paul, as has been mentioned, is a senior policy officer at the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Policy. And he's an expert on climate policy and carbon trading, and focuses his work mainly on the EU ETS system, EU Emission Trading System. And he's also not only focused on the policy, but also in the national implementation of the ETS and related climate policies. Yeah, so he's really the perfect person to be here explaining us about the ETS and also Netherlands industry tax. And he's also involved in ongoing European negotiation to reform the ETS in line with the EU's new climate ambitions. So without further ado, please welcome again. You're here. Please give a warm applause for Paul van Baal. And our second speaker is the gentleman next to Paul. His name is Richard Middle. Thanks, Richard, for coming. He's also a professional with over 15 years of experience in commercial and business development in the energy industry. He's currently the manager of strategic business development at Groningen Seaports. It's an industrial complex. I think Richard will explain more about Groningen Seaports in his presentation. And in this webinar, he will share the lessons learned of the implementation of carbon tax and also ETS carbon system from the industry point of view. We have two other speakers who will join us in the next in the second session. We will have Ibu Verika Indah Arika, and also we will have Mrs. Kamia Handayani, PhD, who will be representing PLN, or state-owned electricity company in Indonesia, for the second session. So we have everyone we need right now from the Netherlands. Maybe a little bit of background. I think Mr. Ambassador has mentioned before the background why we have this, and I really like the fact that he used the word timely, because really what we're going to discuss today is a very timely discussion from a recent event of COP26 in Glasgow this year. And if I can give a little bit of summary of key conclusions among many, the first one is that the net zero pledges cover almost 90% of global emissions, which is good. The second one is a breakthrough on implementing Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, which is about carbon, a global carbon market. Yeah, so the Article 6 of Paris Agreement will pave the way for the development of a global carbon market. In this webinar, we're not going to focus on global carbon market, but we are going to focus on fundamental instruments that enable us to do that, which is, in this case, we are going to talk about carbon tax and emission trading system, or ETS. And in this webinar, we're going to learn from two countries, one who has implemented it, which is the Netherlands, and one who is about to implement it next year, which is Indonesia. And to start, I would like to give the floor to Paul, maybe because for some people, ETS, carbon tax, is something that is really, really new. I would like you to first explain to us briefly what is actually ETS, EU ETS, what is actually carbon tax, and maybe you can elaborate more on how do Netherlands carbon tax work in conjunction with EU ETS.
Thank you for that introduction, Metja. Very kind of you. I was asked to talk a little bit about carbon trading, emissions trading, and carbon taxation. I have prepared a few slides, so maybe if we can put those up. I think the main principle of carbon taxation is to put a price on emissions. So that's companies, industries that actually do emit greenhouse gases have a financial incentive to reduce those. And the companies that offer green solutions, green innovation, actually have a chance to enter the markets because their competitors are more expensive than them because of the carbon trading. Now, there are many, many ways to put a price on emissions. And today I'm talking about two of those, the European Union Emissions Trading System, where companies and industrial installations, they can trade emission allowances. And through that trade, a carbon price comes up in the markets. And the Netherlands Industry Carbon Tax, which is based on the EU ETS, but it actually has a fixed price. So it's a very intricate instrument that I will explain after I first introduce the emissions trading system. So if you can maybe go to the next slides. The idea of emissions trading is very simple. Every company that emits CO2 has to have an allowance to emit that CO2. So they monitor their emissions on a yearly basis, and at the end of the year, they have to surrender those allowances. Now, those allowances can be bought on the markets, they can be traded between companies, and they can also be given away for free under certain conditions. But in principle, those markets are tradable, so a price exists. And because the amount of allowances are limited, we can actually reduce the total emissions that are covered under the ETS. Currently, the EU ETS covers about 40% of all European emissions in the industry sector, the electricity sector, and the aviation sector. And as Metja announced, the European Union is currently reforming the European trading ETS for the new higher climate ambition. This initiative is called Fit for 55. And under that proposal, more sectors will be covered by the trading system. The goal for this system is to reduce the emissions by 43% in 2030. And under the new target, it would be 61%. So I think this is very briefly, without taking too much time, the introduction for emissions trading. But as I said, it's more of an emissions allowance trading than it is actually emissions trading. No CO2 is actually being traded. It's all a financial instrument, the emissions allowances. So you can go to the next slide, please. As I said, emission allowances can be bought on the markets or they can be received for free. In the European Union, to combat the risk of carbon leakage, which is what we call the situation when an industrial installation moves their production capacity to outside the European Union because of the high CO2 costs inside the European Union, taking away the emissions, so the carbon leaks to outside the EU, but also the employment and the economic activity. So this is a highly unwanted situation. In order to do that, to mitigate this risk, we allocate a certain part of the allowances to industrial installations for free. And we do this based on so-called benchmarks. And benchmarks are basically the amount of emissions that the top 10% performers emit to produce their products. And on the bar chart that you can see that a producer that is very efficient will actually have a surplus of free allowances that it can sell on the market. So it has a financial benefit. And an industrial installation that emits more than the top 10% will actually have a shortage, and it would have to buy extra allowances on the market. So this way, the financial incentive to reduce emissions stays in place, but the overall financial burden is not too high for the companies that are at risk of carbon leakage. Now, these emissions allowances are tradable on the market, so a market price exists, and this is pretty much market fundamentals, the difference, the balance between supply and demand. And as you can see on the graph, this price has been skyrocketing the last few months. And actually, there's many reasons that we can discuss if anyone is interested on why this is happening. But I think one of the big reasons is, as already mentioned before, that the climate ambitions of the European Union have been increased substantially. So all the companies are expecting that the amount of allowances will be reduced substantially, hence the price will go up. Now, so you might be wondering, this whole intricate system of trading allowances, what has it actually achieved? If we can go to the next slide. We see here, since the introduction of the EU ETS, the emission levels compared to the 2005 levels in the European Union and in the Netherlands. And there are many reasons why the emissions have reduced, not only the ETS, there's also other policies in every country to reduce emissions. But this graph does give you a little bit of an insight in that. You see a small dip around the economic crisis that started in 2008, and then in the Netherlands, at least, an increase in emissions after that. But I think the biggest lesson learned here from this graph is that the European Union emissions have decreased much faster than they have in the Netherlands in the ETS sectors. And the reason for this is because there's a harmonized CO2 price across the EU, meaning that the most cost-effective measures are taken first. And those do not necessarily have to be in the Netherlands. So, for instance, coal power plants are much more present in other countries, and those will be the first to generally be phased out under carbon pricing because they have the highest carbon emissions. In the Netherlands, we have gas power plants, which are a bit more efficient, so they will actually only later be phased out in the transition because they have a lower financial incentive to do so. And this is the same for industrial installations that are highly efficient. Newer installations, for instance, they will only later on decide to reduce their emissions because the price is still a bit low. So as I mentioned before, this is the overall emissions levels, but the two main sectors in the ETS are industry and power. And we're also talking about the industry carbon tax today. So maybe if we can go to the next slide. Here you can see the emission developments in the Netherlands ETS sectors for the industry and for the electricity sector, the power sector. And here you see a huge difference, that the industry has actually increased its emissions since 2005, even though it has been subject to the carbon pricing, whereas the energy sector has decreased its emissions much more. This is, of course, also due to the fact that sustainable energy technologies, wind, solar, are much more cost effective than industrial decarbonization, which requires much more expensive technology, but also because the Netherlands has simply gone through quite extensive economic growth after the recession ended, meaning that a lot more production has actually come to the Netherlands. Now, for the European system, this is not a problem at all. The European emissions have decreased. You've just seen a shift to where those emissions take place. But of course, there's a genuine national ambition to also reduce emissions at the national level, if you just look at the Netherlands level. So in 2019, the Dutch government negotiated a climate agreement with all the different sectors. And one of the sectors being discussed with was the industry, how to reduce emissions to reach the national climate ambitions. Because of course, rising emissions are not in line with that ambition. So that is why we have this Netherlands industry carbon tax. Maybe we can go to the next slide. As the ambassador said, it's still very new. The industry carbon tax was only put in place this year. So a lot of the systems are still being tested. No company has had to surrender any allowances under that system yet. So the lessons for implementations are very few. But the idea is, in principle, that there's also national emissions reductions. There's a goal of 14.3 megatons of CO2 that have to be reduced by 2030 within the industry sector. So the scope here is the ETS industry, but also some industry that are not covered by the EU ETS. Notably, the electricity generation, which is covered by the ETS, is not under the industry carbon tax. It's purely for the industry. The electricity sector got their own different policy to implement the targets. So to lower the administrative burden on companies to be subject to two systems at the same time, which of course can be quite difficult, the idea was to mirror the national carbon tax as much as possible on the EU ETS, meaning that the monitoring, reporting, verification of emissions is identical. The price of the carbon tax is actually a price which is a minimum, let's say, on the EU ETS. So if the price of the carbon tax is lower than the ETS, no installation has to pay. And if it is higher than the current ETS price, only the difference has to be paid. Of course, for those installations that are not subject to the ETS, they always have to pay the full price. Since the price is only at the introduction 30 euros per ton, whereas in the graph you could see before that the current ETS price is much higher than that. For the coming years, we do not expect any industrial installation to pay under the national carbon tax, but most likely around 2024, 2025, the Netherlands industry carbon tax will be higher than the European system, so further incentivizing national emissions reductions. The carbon tax is not levied on all emissions. Also nationally, we are concerned with the risk for carbon leakage. So we came up with an intricate system to determine which part of the emissions are so-called abatable with current technologies, which part industry could feasibly reduce. And those are the emissions that are actually taxed. The emissions that are not yet abatable under that system are not taxed. So we call it a marginal tax rate only on the part on top of that unabatable emissions. And that is actually based on the ETS benchmarks. As again, I said, those are the top 10% performers. So we are basically telling our companies that we want them to go to the technology level of that top 10% at the EU level. Of course, we need to keep in mind the 14.3 megatons. So there's a correction factor there, but that might be a little bit more too detailed. But I think that in principle explains the two systems and the reason why we went from purely an European system to also a national system. And I think I'll leave it at that for the explanation.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it's very clear. I hope it's also clear for you. Thank you for your explanation. And I think if I can summarize, for the reason why the Netherlands have Netherlands carbon tax on top of EU ETS is because they want to have more tax and also more tax on top of that to be able to reduce the carbon emission even more. Although in the implementation itself, it has just been introduced this year in 2021, and the carbon price, as you can see from his graph, is higher than the tax itself. So there is no surcharge now for the industry. But the plan is that in 2024, so the forecast will be the 2024 price will be higher. So then the industry will start paying. And then for the moment, we will, the Netherlands focus only for the abatable emissions. So it doesn't cover all. And I think that one thing about carbon tax and EU ETS, but also I believe to go far, we also need to see if this system incentivizes the penetration of renewable energy, the adoption of renewable energy technologies, for example, right? Because carbon tax is one thing, but you also need some other instruments to, to make industry switch from coal, for example, in this case, to gas, or from gas to renewables. So how about Netherlands in this case? Do you also have other instruments to incentivize industry players to start adopting renewable energy technologies?
Yes, I think that's a very valid question, and of course, we have lots of other policies in place as well. We always talk about a stick and a carrot approach. So you have to have a stick so that a company actually feels pressured to implement change. If it's not willing to do so, that you have a stick to sort of make sure that this happens, but also a carrot, because you want those companies to also thrive and those companies to stay in your country. So, of course, the carbon taxation is on the one hand the stick that we are talking about. If you do not reduce your emissions, you will have to pay a hefty sum. So we are talking about large amounts of money for the Netherlands industry carbon tax. But then the carrot on the other hand. So I think the most important one that we have nationally is a subsidy scheme called the SDE++. And in principle, all CO2 reducing technologies that industry can use, so that but also renewable energies can actually apply for that subsidy scheme. And you get a rolling subsidy scheme every year, depending on how much CO2 you actually reduced, you get a subsidy based on that. So in the end, you are free to choose which way you want to decarbonize. It's technology neutral, and that subsidy scheme supports it.
Okay, so it's both, yeah? So we need carrot and we also need the stick. And it's good to know that the Netherlands have both. And I'm curious to hear from the Indonesian speakers, do we have both, or do we only have like one, or even do we have more than what the Netherlands have currently? Let's see in the second session what the speakers have to say. Yeah, so Paul, maybe just one last question for you, because you've seen the implementation of both, and anything you would like to tweak from the current system. What do we still need to change in the Netherlands, or do you think it's perfect already? It's just the market fundamentals that have gone wrong this year.
No, I think of course there's many things that can be improved. We are, as we say, working within the system. If you design an ideal system from the scratch, you will always make different choices than when you have to implement something in a functioning society. So there are many things that, of course, can be changed. But I do think for the Netherlands industry carbon tax right now, because it's been implemented just now, the focus should really be on the implementation. Because companies, they at least we'll hear maybe if my co-speaker disagrees, but they do benefit from long-term clarity on what the policy is going to be, what the regulatory schemes are going to be. So I wouldn't advocate changing the industry carbon tax right away now. But I do think one element that has been gaining more attention is that large emitters or large companies, they need also, for instance, support on their infrastructure. If you want to decarbonize electrification, if you want to implement hydrogen solutions, you need to have the infrastructure to actually deliver that to you. And there's generally a very large role for the government to ensure that that's the case. And a company will never make an investment decision that will cost, millions or billions, if it's not sure that the facilities that it's placing on its site will actually be able to get the energy that it needs, for instance. So I think there's a large role for governments and for the Dutch government to sit together with the large industrial sites in the Netherlands to come up with plans to actually make sure that what is needed gets there. But on the actual policy side, on the taxation side, of course, it's not perfect. There's many things that we would like to change, but we want to see first how it lands.
Thank you. So I think it's also a nice segue to the industry players, because he's been nudging, okay, let's just hear from the industry players. Are they happy with the system, right? So we have here Richard, and then, I would like ask the same questions to you, but then probably because you're from Groningen Seaports, it's probably nice for us to hear more about the Groningen Seaports, and then we will go to the questions of what the industry in Groningen Seaports have experienced so far from this. Do we have good stories, bad stories, anything? I'm curious to hear, and also maybe after that I'll be back to Paul just to give a comment on the first-hand experience. So I'll give the floor to you, Richard.
Thank you very much, Mutia, and thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very honored to be here today and have the opportunity to tell our story. As said, I'm working for the company Groningens Seaports. And in this presentation, I will tell you something about the Groningen Seaports, and I will also tell you a bit more about how we try to achieve as Groningen Seaports our goals in the decarborization, not only as a harbor, but also with our client base and also the future customers who are willing to invest their company in our region. Please, next slide. Our mission as Groningen Seaports is exist to responsibly and sustainably promote economic activities and accordingly employment at the ports. Employment is very important for our region. And of course, we also would like to create business sites and other logistic hubs, because we are a central point with our harbor, but also with rail and also the roads. So that's what we try to achieve. Please, next slide. And just to give you an idea of Groningen Seaports, Groningen Seaports is located in the north of the Netherlands, and Groningen Seaports has two harbors. One harbor is the Eemshaven. It's located at the left, on the right picture, on the left top, and that's really focused more on energy in a broad perspective. And the second harbor we have is Delfzijl, and that's more a chemical cluster of companies. Please, next slide. And our strategy, I will focus on the right side of the slide. Our strategy is that we focus in our product market combination on energy and data. That's especially focused in the Eemshaven, where we have approximately 8,000 megawatt of installed capacity by gas, coal, but also sustainable energy, green energy. Then we have the chemical and circular economy, so the bio-based, and that's primarily focused on the Delfzijl area of our authority. Please, next slide. Yeah. We started, not we started, but the Dutch government started a program and invited, I think, 6 regions in the Netherlands to come up with plans as an industry, how we can achieve the goals which were set in the Paris Climate Agreement. And Groningen Seaports was the chair member of one of those tables. And we had this industry cluster of the north of the Netherlands. So what we did is we organized roundtable conversations with the objective of to get as much as possible input on how we, as a whole group, can achieve decarborization. So at the end of the day, 7 solutions came up, and those are presented in the slide. So it was energy efficiency, change of hydrogen, so electrification, but also the hydrogen, of course, process innovation, green raw materials, so the green molecules or bio-based, circularity, use each other's input-output in your processes, system innovations, and of course, carbon capture, storage, and CCU. And this presentation, what I will do is give you more elaboration on some programs, further programs, but also on some projects and practical projects which were run by companies. So if you, next slide. Maybe good to show you is this is a little bit different than the slide of Paul, where he showed that the industry did not do any reduction. But in our case, in the north of the Netherlands, we see, if you look back from the past to 2019, what we have achieved is less carbon emissions, but we increased the production output. So that means that we have made good steps in decarborization. So all the steps we have made, so the 7 suggestions from this roundtable discussion, already some parts were already implemented, and the results have been seen. And from the roundtable discussions, 33 new projects were identified with an investment scheme of 2.8 billion. So that's a big achievement and also a big challenge for the future to reach that and to, of course, reduce carbon. If you can show the next slide, we have organized ourselves as Groningens Seaports, but also as a chemical cluster, not only Eemshaven and Delfzijl, but also in the area more to the south, located at Veendam and in the south of the province of Drenthe. There you have a kind of backbone of chemical clusters, and they're all integrated to Gemport, and there where we try to attract new companies, but also look at synergies. So if you can go to the next slide, then we'll try to go a little bit more deeper towards Groningens Seaports. Here you see also a grid of different companies who are working together with trying to achieve synergy effects. And I think it's good to know that in the north of the Netherlands, we produce approximately 20% of the chemical products which is needed. If you go to a little bit the next slide, please, then I'll deepen out our Delfzijl area, the chemical cluster. You see also a lot of companies with the dots and a lot of colored lines. And those colored lines indicate the synergy effect. So then you talk about system innovation, process innovation, etc. So companies try to have an advantage from each other. And if we go to, and I will have another showcase of that later on this presentation, which will state a little bit more about this. So here we are really looking at synergy effects, and as Groningens Seaports, we try to accommodate that. So if company A and B want to work together, but the infrastructure is needed, then Groningens Seaports will invest in the infrastructure that this business case can profit, and this will help us also to decarbonize. If you go to the next slide. Yes, from this roundtable discussion we had with the industry, we made a connection with the infrastructure. And like Paul already mentioned, what is very important, if we have all these ideas and projects, you also have to make sure that if you want to go to electrification or hydrogen, you need the infrastructure. So there's a big challenge for us in the north, because we expect in 2025 that we need approximately 1,800 megawatt. Currently, it's about 400 megawatts, so that's a real steep increase, and that's all it has to do with we need green energy. And if you look at 2015, the number will be around 17 gigawatt. So that is really big challenge for us to help in the decarbonization. If you go to the next slide. Like I said, one of the topics which came out of roundtable is we have to shift towards hydrogen. The Netherlands is known for the natural gas, but we need to move away from natural gas for different reasons, of course. And here we see why the north of the Netherlands is very popular as a location to accommodate the hydrogen. So first of all, there's a huge offtake market for hydrogen. GasUnie, the big infrastructure company of the Netherlands, is located in the north of the Netherlands. We also have a high potential of offshore wind, which can be accommodated from the Eemshaven port. Furthermore, we have strategic locations. We have a dense and available infrastructure because we have the natural gas infrastructure, which can be turned around to the hydrogen infrastructure. Furthermore, we have storage places in the north of the Netherlands. And furthermore, we have a lot of universities in which we can build up knowledge and create innovation hubs. If you go to the next slide. Okay, so this is one. If you look at our Delfzijl region, I said we try to connect different companies towards each other. In this case, the company Nobium achieved a reduction of approximately 100,000 tons of CO2 emissions by working together with two other steam production units. So they were producing steam by natural gas, but the other two ones were producing natural gas by burning plastics as an incinerator. And we had a biomass plant who was also producing steam. And if you look at this total cluster, then yeah, the end effect of it was that Nobium was achieving this nice and very good CO2 reduction. So this is really an example of working together and have a system integration and working towards ecosystems. If we go to the next slide. Yeah, this is news of, I think, 2 weeks ago. In the Eemshaven, we have Holland Malt. Malt is a product for brewing beer. And they have a program that they want to be emission-free in 2024. What they do is they need a lot of heat for their drying process. And they will be installing heat pumps. And with the heat pumps, they can reduce their consumption of energy with 70%, but still there will be 30% energy consumption. And what they do is they will not purchase it from a coal-fired plant or a natural gas-fired plant, but they will contract wind and solar energy. And with that package, they become emission-free. So there will be the first malt factory worldwide who will be emission-free. So, and that's also located in the Netherlands, and the malt is, I think, exported worldwide. So if you drink in the Netherlands a beer Bavaria, then the malt comes from this plant. If you go to the next, yes, thank you very much. Paul was already talking about sticks and carrots. I think I mentioned some projects which were more like the carrots, where companies was driven by their own incentives to reduce emissions. And I think I have two examples of where those two companies face or experience the stick. For instance, if you look at the left side, that is ESD. They produce silicon carbide, which is used in cast iron, these particular filters, refractory grades. And on the right side, we have Aldel. It's an Alumni producing company. They have that CO2 emissions. But if you look at the chemistry, for instance, to produce silicon carbide, you cannot change nature, because each ton of silicon carbide you will produce 2.5 tons of CO2. There's no way you can trick chemistry or nature. So, and they are already, if you look at the merit order in the silicon carbide business, they are the number one. If you look at the environmental friendly, lowest emission, etc. And Aldel, that's also the case that they are very efficient in producing the alumina. And both products are products which we need in society. So here, as Paul said, the government has to make real decisions on which industry do we want to keep, which industry do we want to promote. And I think, especially for ESD, but also for Aldel, one of the lessons learned is level playing field. Not only level playing field within Europe, because competitors in Europe, you also have different regulations, but especially also worldwide. If in the case of ESD, they have competition in Romania, they have competition in Spain, but they are the only factory with a power plant because they reuse the process gas, and now they're more or less punished. Or we can say the Romanians also need to incorporate it on the ETS, which is not the fact. So there's a production cost disadvantage, and especially the big competitions in China. So they really need to fight for their position, although it's a very green product. So the less learned level playing field. And of course, there's also a regulation on supporting these companies, and it would be wise, especially because other states in the European Union already implemented it, is to support these companies by indirect cost. And I think that's the end of my presentation, and with some practical cases of in the area of Groningen Seaports.
Thank you, Richard. So I think if I have to summarize, there are two stories here, right? First is that Groningen Seaports is way is above the expectation because the emission is decreasing, and then the production is increasing. So probably there is an industry cluster somewhere in the Netherlands where they emit more than what they used to, right? If we just look at the numbers in perspective. So that's one. The second one is about competitiveness, right? Because you said carrot and stick. Some companies are really encouraged to invest in renewable energy solutions to make their production carbon free, but some others also willing but struggle to compete with similar industries elsewhere, from Romania or even from China, for example. And I think you mentioned a little bit that there is an incentive from the EU and also from the Netherlands government to keep this industry. But maybe for you as the policy maker, Paul, to elaborate more about that, because it's against the debate environment versus economy at the end, right? Where is the delicate balance? So I don't know, maybe you can elaborate more about that before we give the chance for the audience to ask questions.
Thank you. I think it's a very valid question on both sides, and it's a very difficult one to answer as well. Because on the one hand, the EU and the Netherlands, we have very, very ambitious targets, the most ambitious targets in the world. And on the other hand, we do want to keep our industry here. So we always try to find a balance. We are always starting off from looking at a level playing field at a global level. Of course, this is very difficult to achieve. So then the second best would be at the European level. This is why the Dutch government is very much in favor of the EU ETS as one of the main instruments at the EU level. And then, of course, if this still doesn't give us the results we want, we will also implement national policies, and all the while trying to design our policies so as to reduce the risk that companies actually are forced to leave because of our climate policies, because we do want to keep our industry here. So I'm very much aware of the situation that was just described with the indirect costs, and I think we have to find out a solution here, whether or not we can still keep on supporting those industries. That's not my decision, unfortunately, but I do recognize that it's always a delicate balance. So at the European level, we can actually stimulate a level playing field. We can advocate for that, but at the global level, it's much more difficult. So the ambassador also mentioned COP26 earlier. That is a place where we do try to get other countries on board with higher climate ambition. And you said that by now, 90% of the world is covered by net zero emissions. So I think that as soon as other countries start implementing those targets with real policies, then those industries in those countries will also be forced to decarbonize, which will make sure that there is a global level playing field as well, or a much better level playing field, let's say. And on the other hand, the European Union and the Netherlands is definitely in favor of this, is also trying to stimulate other countries to also adopt those policies. Notably, there's currently a proposal for a border correction mechanism, the carbon border adjustment mechanism, which will actually force importing companies to pay for the emissions that they are importing at the same level as that EU companies have to pay for their emissions for their products. So in this way, at least companies within the EU will be protected against competition from imports from outside the EU. And I think this is a step in the right direction. Of course, in an ideal world, we don't need such a mechanism. In the ideal world, every country is also implementing policies to decarbonize. But in the world that we are currently living in, this might be a necessary step.
Yeah, I agree. So it's really a long journey because everybody needs to be in the same playing field so that we can, trade fairly. People can honor the environment as well as flourishing for their economy, right? So really appreciate your explanation, Paul and Richard. Thank you so much for being here. Let's open the question from the audience. Maybe we can start from the audience here. If any questions from the audience, please raise your hand. Okay. You may come forward to the microphone, or probably for people in. Or you can also, it's better with the microphone, Pak. With stand mic, yeah.
Thank you, moderator, and also thank you for I have to read Paul and Richard for your important presentation. If we talk about the emission rate and etc., so it means we talk about the new, the now and future. We talk about the new energy. We talk about new renewable energy. We talk new technology, etc. So. For information, I'm Kusno, transportation attaché. In transportation, we try to also to increase to reduce the emission for the in national policy. And Paul mentioned for the cover for the emission for the four sector, this is cover 40%, include for the aviation and also shipping. My question is, do you have the action plan maybe for the four sector? This is cover because this is cover 40% to reduce the emission. This is maybe you have because I want to learn how to because aviation and also shipping is contribute. I think the bigger. So I mean, do you have for the national policy in Netherlands? And how about because we talk about the emission tax for the example for the KLM, do you pay to EU for the tax, and how much for 1 year, for example, and how to reduce? And also for Richard, because for the Groningen Seaport, how do you monitor? How do you verification for in your seaport? And I believe that maybe seaport to be the green seaport like that. Maybe you have also policy like that. Okay, thank you.
So I think the question for you first for the key action plan for shipping and aviation, and also maybe I think he asked also about the mechanism how the Netherlands pay to the EU for the more the carbon tax that it needs to the carbon emissions to reduce emissions.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah. So first, very briefly on the aviation and the shipping. So the aviation is already in the ETS since I believe 2013, and the shipping will be introduced according to the current proposal in a few years. I'm not an expert on transportation, so I don't know too much detail about other policies that we have for these sectors. I do know that at the EU level, there's also a fuel policy, let's say, blending obligations for sustainable aviation fuels, and policies to reduce the emission intensity of the fuels in shipping. But I think these two sectors are a real illustration of how national policies are very difficult or maybe not the right level for a very international sector. Aviation, of course, is very easy to implement national policies, but in a sector like that, I think global policies and or European policies are much more effective. I hope that answers your question a little bit. Yeah. And then on the second question, how much, if I understand it correctly, if we pay to the EU for the emission reductions, that's not, luckily, that's not how the system works. So we do have companies paying for their emission allowances, and that money flows for the most part back to the member states. And member states can use that money to actually stimulate decarbonization further. So there's no direct transfer to the EU on that. And for the industry carbon tax, it's actually the same. We don't expect large amounts of revenues from that, as it's only on the abatable emissions, and it's only it's currently at a lower level than the EU. So we don't expect any large sums there. But that also flows to the national budgets.
Okay, thank you. I hope that answers. But thanks for your question. And
yes, to repeat the question, I think you have asked me if there is a monitoring system in place for Groningen Seaports. I would like to answer that question in twofold. One, based on Groningen Seaports, we had this roundtable discussions with the industry. So we have a data safe room where all the industry put in their figures based on an NDA. Of course, that's classified information to a certain extent. And we agreed as a group with also the infrastructure companies to make an update on a yearly basis. So that's how we will follow up the achievements and how the development will be. The other answer to my question, is the Dutch government also has the ETS. And from my experience working at the ESD, on a yearly basis, each company who is registered on the ETS has an obligation of a monitoring protocol. So they have to show the Dutch emission authority what their emission is on a yearly basis. And then you have your free allowances, and then you also know what allowance you need to buy and what maybe you can sell. So the Dutch government is monitoring the emission of the companies and industries. But as Groningen Seaports, we have an agreement on this round table to do it on a 2-yearly basis.
Okay, just one.
Do you have the regulation regarding reduced emission? That government regulation to reduce emission. I want to know what the detailed program for the Dutch government to reduce. Like, for example, in Indonesia, we have to change the new energy from the fossil to electric one in airport. And also we plant some trees, for example, in airport. Like this is our policy, Indonesia policy. If I can learn policy here, maybe this is more benefit for me to how that's government to make to reduce the emission. Thank you. This is maybe any regulation like that. Thank you.
So maybe just like a detailed information on the action plans of the Dutch government to reduce emission, where he can find it, probably, because we cannot cover it today, but maybe if you can refer to a link or a website where he can find it.
I think it's a very valid question, but it's too hard to answer this question in the limited time here. We have policies covering almost every aspect of Dutch life and the economy to decarbonize. I think a great starting point would be the 2019 climate agreement. It's the climate accord, I think, and maybe it's a better translation. And here we really go per sector. So industry, electricity, transport, buildings, agriculture. And there we have detailed agreements and detailed policies on how we are going to reach the climate targets. I think that's
So it's 2019 climate accord, right? Yeah. So you can find that document. I think it's also available online, I believe.
Yeah.
All right. So we also have a question from the audience online. To Paul, Richard can also add, if the Indonesian government applies the carbon tax, the operation cost of coal-fired power plants will be impacted. As such, electricity generation costs will increase, and so does the price charged to people and industries. It will impact to national economic growth. Can you please share us the story on how the Netherlands finally decided to apply the carbon tax, and what is the current carbon tax today, dollar per ton?
There's many questions in one. I think the first is very explanatory, and it's indeed correct that the carbon price will increase the price of electricity generation, but it's a bit more nuanced because it only increases the cost of the CO2 emissions of electricity generation. So if at the same time the CO2 emissions of your generation go down, invest heavily in wind and solar and other sustainable energy technologies, then the actual impact of the CO2 tax on the electricity price is mitigated because there's less CO2 emissions. And that's, of course, the end goal. So yes, there is an increase in electricity prices, and we see that now in Europe and elsewhere as well. But of course, the end goal is that there is no impact of the CO2 price on the electricity because there are no more CO2 emissions. So it's a balance there. And on the other hand, the higher energy price also for consumers stimulates them to implement efficiency measures, more efficient machines and household utilities. So there's also an added benefit there. Of course, you have to pay attention that everybody can still afford the energy. We don't want to come into an energy poverty crisis. So there's also policies to mitigate that at the same time. I think that's maybe the best I can say about this. The discussion on introducing any sort of pricing or taxation is always very difficult for always very similar reasons, risking poverty or distributional effects. And I think it's always a matter of finding the right tools to accompany those measures so that you keep in place the incentive to reduce emissions without the negative side effects.
Yep. And also on the current carbon tax today, $1 per ton. Do you have the latest and greatest?
It's skyrocketing. I think we hit the ceiling of 90 euros per ton, which I guess is $100 or $110 per ton recently, but it went down a little bit again. So I think it's at 80 now,
okay.
But I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, Richard, please.
If I may add to the question, higher electricity prices, it also depends in what kind of industry you are. If you are working business to consumer, of course, the consumer will experience a slightly higher price. But depending on the product, if it's luxury, he will be willing to pay it. Right? Yeah. But if you are looking at business to business, then we see that companies are suffering the high prices. So the natural gas prices at the moment, if you look at the fertilizer industry, they are suffering at the moment. Alumni is suffering at the moment to keep up their cost price because electricity is, let's say, 40-45% of their cost price. And that's the same for silicon carbide. So in my case, I've been working at ESD, total consumption of 400,000 megawatt hours per year. €1 price increase would be 400,000 euros. So that is the magnitude, and the margin you make on this project is very, very small. So yeah, it has a direct impact. Just to elaborate a little bit on that.
Yeah, and it happens everywhere, right? Not only in Indonesia, even in the Netherlands, in EU, you will face the same problem. So it's everyone's problem at the moment.
That's true, and there's also the challenge for the politics and the countries to make right decisions on how you see the future, and that means that you take positive actions or decisions, but you also have to make some hard decision on what do you want to promote or stimulate, and be clear on that, and help those companies then further.
Thank you. I think that was the end of our Q&A session, the first session. I think we will go straight to the session 2, in which we will have 2 speakers from Indonesia. So I'll introduce them. Maybe first I would like to check online if I can hear them. Okay, together with me, I have 2 ladies, Ibu Verika and Ibu Kamia. Welcome to the INTPF, the 5th webinar. Can you hear me loud and clear?
Yes, yeah.
Yes, Matia, hello.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for coming. So now let me first introduce you. So I think I will introduce Ibu Verika first. And then Ibu Kamia, I know what you do in PLN, but please help me here to maybe elaborate a little bit about your profile. I think you're here on behalf of Pak Didi, so I think I would really appreciate if you can explain a little bit about you. So let me first introduce our third speaker, Verika Indah Arika, or Ibu Verika. Ibu Verika is a policy analyst in the Fiscal Policy Agency at the Ministry of Finance of the Republic of Indonesia. She focuses on climate-related fiscal policy issues such as climate budget, tagging, carbon pricing, green Islamic financial certificate, or we call it green sukuk, and fiscal instrument for green sectors. Prior to this, she was the subdivision head of energy and industry sector in the Center for Climate Finance and Multilateral Policy covering circular economy, renewable energy, and energy efficiency. And then in this webinar, we're lucky to have her because she will share the Indonesian carbon tax and emission trading system plan, which we plan to implement next year. I heard from Mayerfas is going to be in April 2022, but I think Verika can elaborate more about that. And the next speaker, as we have here, is Ibu Kamia Handayani, PhD. Ibu Kamia Handayani is the climate change manager of PLN. PLN is state-owned electricity company in Indonesia. Ibu Kamia, do you want to add one more two sentences about your role in PLN?
I think that would be enough, but I just want to convey the message and apology from our director, Pak Didi. He's still in the meeting with the parliament, so he's not able to attend this meeting. So allow me to represent him at this opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ibu Kamia. So let's first start probably from Ibu Verika, because we have spoken here for almost an hour in the Netherlands, and I believe you dialing in. So I would like to first ask your opinion about your impression, your summary about the presentation from Paul and Richard. So Ibu Verika, what are your key takeaways from our conversation here in the Netherlands?
Yeah, Indonesia is start to establish, so not yet implement the carbon pricing. So learning from other countries is very important for us in developing establishing the policy and implementation for the carbon pricing. Netherlands, as part of the EU, is one of the object of the study in our site, and it is very interesting that the carbon tax will be implemented in the industry, while we actually start in the energy sector before we start to develop in the other sector. So it is very interesting, and actually there are many questions in my head for the speakers, but I know this opportunity has very limited time, and there are many attendees that should have opportunity to ask the speakers. So if there is a time in the session 2, I will happy if the speakers from Netherlands can also explain maybe about how they set up the cap, how they arrange the interaction between sectors and other technical things like that. I think that's all from me, Mutia.
Thank you, Ibu Verika. Yeah, likewise, I think I would like to still ask a lot of questions, but I think now the session has changed. So first, let's hear from you then about Indonesian carbon tax, right? What are we trying to achieve? The price, policy. I want to know everything because I haven't heard anything. And if I just Google online, I couldn't find anything. So this is really the first information I got, and I'm happy that I can hear it from you today.
Can I start sharing right now?
I think we're still trying to get your slides online. Yeah, it's coming. Yes, we can see it here. We can share this.
Okay. Thank you, moderator, and good afternoon, Bapak Ambassador, speakers, moderators, and all participants. First of all, I would like to say thank you for inviting me to participate in the discussion on the very important topic for Indonesia, yeah, especially carbon pricing and also carbon tax. And I'm sorry if there is a loud noise from here, as it is raining now in my place. As our time is very short and we don't need to waste the precious time, allow me to directly share briefly about the development of carbon pricing and also carbon tax policy in Indonesia. As the background, actually, carbon pricing is a follow-up policy on our commitment to reduce emission. And I'm sure all the participants have already understand that our total emission is quite crucial. But if we compare to our GDP and our population, maybe our emission is not as significant as several countries. But we realize that we are vulnerable countries. That's why we take a joint role with our global entities to control climate change, including under the Paris Agreement. Our contribution target in the NDC is to reduce emission 29% from the business as usual scenario and up to 41% if there is funding support from developing countries. And this target then derived to several sectors where forestry and energy and transportation are the two sectors with the highest target. This commitment has significant financing consequences. As you see in the table, it is projected that we need to at least 3,500 trillion rupiah to meet the mitigation agenda. And our internal analysis, this financing need can only be met around 60% and not only coming from the public investment, but also from private supply. It means that the government need to intervene by innovative policy to mobilize funding so that the climate agenda can be met. And we have already identified the source of funds, and our policy directed into two kind of policy. One is to optimize what we already have, and then the second one is to mobilize the funding. We also develop a financing platform, which not only provide a financing facility, but also to catch the opportunity from various funding source. The carbon pricing is the most recent policy to limit greenhouse gas emission, and also actually to as an alternative to finance the Sustainable Development Program. The objectives is similar to Netherlands. It aims to reduce emission, to as a policy intervention to overcome failure, and as the practice of polluters pay principle, and of course to encourage green investment. We has just established two regulation on the carbon pricing and also carbon tax. The first regulation is Presidential Decree Regulation number 98 of 2021 on implementation of carbon pricing to achieve NDC targets and to control emission in the development. There are several coverage in the regulation, but if we are talking about instruments, the regulation open up two type of instruments, trading instruments and also non-trading instruments. So this regulation give flexibility to the government to develop instrument on carbon pricing. While the law number 7 of 2020 is actually concerning about taxation in general. It is, however, it introduced new type of tax, namely carbon tax. And under this law, it is decided what are the objects that can be imposed on tax, who are the taxpayers, how much is the minimum tariff, and who are the stakeholders, and how it will be implemented. So the objects can be the items containing carbon or carbon emitting activities. And the taxpayer can be individual or corporation, and with the minimum tariff of 30 rupiah per kilograms CO2 equivalent. And it will be implemented following the carbon tax roadmap, which is now being developed and will be carried out initially at coal-fired power plants on April, hopefully, as everyone already aware. And this is the our simple plan. In 2021, we target to finalize the presidential regulation on carbon pricing and law on harmonization of tax regulation, and which that has already finished. And piloting of carbon trading in the power sector, it is already finished too, or already started, and will be continued to the real trading. And the other one is developing a technical mechanism for a carbon tax and carbon exchange. This is still ongoing, and I think it will be carried to the next year. And in 2022 will prepare the derivative regulation from the presidential degree regulation, as well as the law on carbon tax. And Ministry of Finance will focus on the carbon tax management for the power generation sector, while the Ministry of Energy will be focused on the cap and also the technical mechanism and arrangement. And we haven't decided on the tariff, and because it is still discussed. And from Ministry of Environment will be support from the MRV system and also regulation on the carbon trading. In 2025, we expect that carbon trading will be fully implemented and will be expanded to other sectors, as well as the carbon tax. And this is actually can be changed, as we will prepare the roadmap both for carbon tax and also carbon pricing that will be detailed. And there should be a more consideration that will be developed under the roadmap. The piloting.
Or you move on. So thank you, Ibu Ferika, for the explanation. So then the price is 30,000 rupiah per metric tons of CO2, right? Which is around €2, €2.5 compared to it's quite different, because it's going to be my next question on the difference, but then we can already see from the price, and then this is still new, it's quite different there. We have just a little bit of time. Maybe Ibu Ferika, if you can explain your next slide on implementation for the coal power plants, just quickly before we move on to PLN.
Okay, and the piloting from this diagram actually, as I want to show, I want to explain that the carbon tax in the power plant sector may be not very different with the carbon and trade, because if you see in the right diagram, the levy it usually imposed on the emission beyond cap and not be compensated with the emission permit and reduction certificate in our system will be named as a carbon tax. So the difference between the global practice with what will be implemented in Indonesia is the definition of the carbon tax itself. And our carbon tax is also can be defined as the carbon tax in general in global definition. So this that make our maybe carbon pricing instrument is unique than other countries. I think I have already beyond the time allocation, and thank you, and sorry for not finishing all the presentation I prepared. Thank you, Mutia.
Oh, thank you, Verika. No worries. I believe there will be a lot of questions in which we can come back to your slides again when we get the questions. So first, let me first ask to Ibu Kania, from PLN, just to check with you the same way I had the interaction with Paul and Richard here, because Indonesia planned to do this, but then the first target is called Fire Plan, which is under PLN, right? So what are PLN plans to comply with it? Because not only before this carbon tax or carbon trading system is about to get introduced, there's already a plan to move to renewables, but then now there is more push, right, for us to do it even faster, because otherwise you need to pay the carbon tax to Ministry of Finance in Indonesia. So what's the plan of PLN to comply with it?
Thank you very much, Mutia, for the questions, and also first of all, thank you very much for the invitation to PLN to share our view or our plan for regarding how we're going to comply with the recent regulations on carbon pricing. So we realized that carbon pricing is one of the strategic pillars to meet the Indonesian NDC by 2030, and also to achieve our carbon neutral aspirations in 2060. So putting the price on emissions, we hope that it will help us to reduce our emissions. Allow me to share our presentation that we have prepared. So again, Bu Verika already mentions about the trial of the emission trading system that was just happened this year during the March until August, in which PLN play part, the major part in the pilot phase or in the trial of the ETS in Indonesia. But maybe allow me to introduce or to communicate our roadmap first regarding the how as a company we want to reduce our emissions, because it is also related to how we are going to comply with the carbon pricing. So as I mentioned that Indonesia has the target to NDC to meet the NDC, also mentioned already by Ibu Verika, that we have to reduce our emission by 29% in 2030 with our own effort, and 41% with international support. And Indonesia recently submitted the long-term strategies for low carbon and climate resilience, which stated that we want to achieve carbon neutrality by 2060. So aligned with the government aspirations, we also already we are one of the 6 companies in Asia, utility companies in Asia that already announced net zero emission aspirations. So we want to achieve carbon neutrality by 2060. First of all, we are going to do that by, of course, shift away from high carbon power generations. And there is a roadmap for short term and also for long term decarbonization. So for the short term, we want to achieve, or we want to deliver the NDC target of Indonesia for the power sector, because NDC has different target for different sector, and power sector under the NDC, under the energy sector, has a major part, around 53% of the reduction from the energy sector is expected to come from the power sector. So we, as the key players in the power sector, of course, PLN want to deliver the Indonesia's energy target, and we are going to do that. We are doing it right now, is by expanding our renewables capacity. So we recently already issued our latest power development plan from 2020 to 21 to 2030. In this plan, we are going to reduce around 90 million ton of emissions compared to business as usual, which will be achieved by expanding renewable energy, according to our plan, we will have addition of 21 gigawatt of renewable capacity. So the addition of renewable capacity is actually much larger than the addition of fossil fuel, which is 52% until 2030. And the fossil fuel addition is only limited to those that have been constructed or committed, because PLN is also the sole off-taker of electricity. So we also purchase electricity from independent power producers. And in the past, we already have made some contract with the IPP that we have to respect. So for that contract, we still continue accepting those fossil fuel, but we have committed and we have announced that we will stop new development of coal power plant. And also already announced by the government and also by PLN that we will gradually retire our coal plants starting from 2030, and by 2050, by 2056, coal power plant will be completely gone. Except if at that time the cost of CCS, for example, is more attractive than the cost of renewables. So we haven't we still doing our simulation for the exact technology mix that will be there in 2060. And for we also do the biomass co-firing. So this is the conversion of coal into biomass. And then energy efficiency improvement and grid loss improvement also, and also some gas expansion as switching from coal to gas as the transition before we have convert purely to renewable, because gas has during the transition we still are going to use gas. And for the long term, we will add more renewables. We hope that at that time the battery storage cost has already very low, so it will compete with the baseload power generation plant from fossil fuel. So we want to combine renewables and battery storage, and also with interconnection, because most of the renewables also the potentials are also outside the Java Bali, but the demand, of course, 80% of the electricity consumption in Indonesia is in Java Bali. So interconnection is also key here. And we also want to use hydrogen co-firing. I see that in the Netherlands, this is something that already like doing right now, but in Indonesia, we still doing a study on this one. And also it is possible to use carbon capture and storage to reduce a lot of emission from coal and gas power plant. And also we will add more coal plant retirement, as we already targeted until from 2030 until 2056. And besides that, shifting away from high carbon power generation, of course, we will also, on the demand side, we also want to push the use of low carbon technologies, like the use of induction stove or electricity stove. It is very common in the Netherlands, but in Indonesia, we're still using gas for cooking. But along with the switch to cleaner electricity, the use of induction stove will reduce emissions. And also electric vehicle, which is very efficient compared to ICE vehicle. So this will reduce emission even at the current grid emission factor, or the current energy mix in Indonesia. And of course, solar rooftop and energy as a service is also something that we look for. And we also want to expand our renewable energy certificate product and carbon credits. And this is one of the emission trading scheme which we are going to discuss right now is actually part of our pillars to achieve net zero emissions. And as the foundation, of course, we have to build our internal capacities or capabilities in terms of low carbon technologies, and also in terms of our ability to make this decarbonization plan happen. So it's already, I think, explained in the slide of Ibu Verika. I just want to emphasize the mechanic, how was the trial happened in Indonesia. So this is part of the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources initiative. as much as 26 PLN coal power plants, and also there are additional 4, if I'm not mistaken, 4 private coal power plant also participate in the trial. And the MEMR introduced a cap for the 3 groups of power plants, and based on this cap, each power plant can calculate how much the emission allowance that is allowed for them to be emitted. If they have excess emissions, then they have to trade with other installations that have unused allowance. So as mentioned by Ibu Verika, the current price at that time, the trial price between power plants was around $2 per ton CO2. Besides using trading allowance between installation, there was also offset. Yeah, I think in EU also this is used to be quite a lot of portion of offset, but I think in phase 4 of the EU ETS, the offset from credit like CDM is no longer is not allowed, and maybe speakers from the Netherlands can correct me if I'm wrong. So we also some of coal power plant also purchase credits from carbon credits from renewable energy that has issued carbon credits through a voluntary carbon standard or verified carbon standard. And also there is a national mechanism that was established by the Ministry of Energy that it is possible for us to for the renewable energy power plant to issue a certificate of emission reductions from the government. So they can claim emission reduction from their renewable energy, and the government will verify and then issue the certificate. So this certificate can be used as for the emission offset from the coal power plant to the renewable energy power plant. I think this one I can skip concerning the time. So maybe I will. I think that will be our first answer, Bu Metia, for your questions.
Yeah, and maybe just elaborate a little bit. Thank you very much first for the explanation. I will come to the Netherlands speaker to just give comments on that. What do you think, how similar or different it is compared to EU ETS based on your opinion? But before that, the challenges, right? Because you have plans, you have roadmap, but what can you see already as the challenges in implementing this? Is it more like compliance, monitoring, or where does it lie?
So regarding the challenges, I think because this is the first phase, we just had the trial, and then know that we already will have, like, in the next less than 1 year, we will have to do it as a compliance basis, because before we expect that it will be happen in 2024, because according to the regulations regarding the economic instrument for environment, it was stated that the emission trading scheme should be there by 2024. So we were expected that it will be happen at that time, but now we have to make it happen like next year. So what still become our concern is regarding the cap of the emission itself, because what I saw to you earlier, it is the cap for the trial phase. So we don't know yet what will be the cap for the next year in April. It should be determined by the government before April, but then we will have like a very short time to anticipate that, because the budget for, I think the power plant has to make the budget plan at this moment, at this year, for the next year. But the budget plan for this tax still have to, like, based on the emission cap during the trial, because we don't know yet what is the cap for the next year. And then maybe from the EU can also explain regarding the MRP. Is it introduced before the ETS implemented, or at the same time? Because I think in Indonesia, we already have, like, the reporting system to the Ministry of Energy, but we don't have like independent verificator for our report. So I understand, because I think 2 weeks ago I was participated in the training from the government of the Germany, when they say about the EU ETS and also how the ETS in German, and they say that a company had to there should be an accredited entity that verified the company's report on emissions. So, but in Indonesia there is still not there. And I think this is because the regulations also, the regulation that is already there is on the very high level regulation, not technical regulation. Bukarike mentioned that this regulation will be coming soon. So I think this is the regulation that is the technical regulation or the technical mechanism that is not there. I think it makes us still challenging to like what should we prepare inside the company to anticipate those mechanism that will be in place in April. Another thing is on the internal capabilities, of course, because ETS is a new concept for us. We just have this trial, the trial this year, and it is although I think since 2017 there is already like some discussions on the possibility of doing ETS in Indonesia, but the level of understanding, especially from the power plant operators, is still limited. So we still need to do many internal capacity building for the power plant operator, how they monitor and report, and how they do this process. And then, of course, regarding to our like a larger plan to decarbonize, there will be incremental electricity costs of shifting from higher carbon power generations. And it also involves a large scale of capital. And there are also new technologies that will be very helpful to reduce a large amount of emissions, but this is still very early stage technology, and we have to also, I think, if we want to be carbon neutral by 2060, we also have to like deploy the technology at scale in Indonesia. So to be able to meet the challenges, of course, there are some unlocks that is required during the regulation. I think the setup of implementing regulations of the law number 7 and also presidential regulation number 98. I think it is we hope for a transparent and also inclusive process during the formulations of the regulations, and also how the MRP system, I think, should be fully operational by that time, and we have to develop our internal capabilities, and we also have to set. All of us have to set up a mechanism to make the energy transition, the decarbonization impact is gradually absorbed. So it's not like a shock for the Indonesian economy or Indonesian or in our point of view for our customer, because we don't want to increase our electricity costs directly. I mean, at the sudden, so it has to be gradual.
Yeah,
and also Okay.
Sorry, do you want to add one more point or?
Also we need a lower cost of financing. Support.
Thank you. So we've heard so many challenges here. I think I have 5 at least. The cap, also to verify it, internal capabilities, high electricity costs, and then the last, as she mentioned, the financing part, right? So before I open the Q&A for the last session, I would like to maybe ask you to give some comments about this about to get introduced, ETS and carbon tax. Do you think, is it similar? Where do you see it similar, or completely different than the EU ETS or the Dutch carbon tax? It's besides the price, of course.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the very interesting presentation. For me, this was the first time hearing about the Indonesia emissions trading system and carbon tax, and I think it's a very good initiative that this is happening also on the other side of the world, that we have a similar system in place. I think the differences are quite clear. Of course, the price and the scope, which installations fall under it. But there's also a lot of stuff that is actually very similar. So I think the challenges that were mentioned on the monitoring, reporting, and verification, I think that is still very much the same. Of course, we do have many years of experience already, and we have been able to tweak the MRV system every few years to improve on it. But it still remains one of the largest administrative burden for the government and for the companies to actually monitor their emissions and report and verify those reports, and then for the government to check them and to allocate allowances based on them. And I think it's a lot of work, but of course it is also very crucial, because without knowing where the CO2 emissions are taking place, it's very hard to also reduce them. So I think it is an added value. But yeah, I think that's a very similar challenge for both systems.
Yeah. Okay, and Richard.
Yeah, if I may add, thank you very much for the presentations. Of course, I don't know really the situation in Indonesia with the electricity and the off-takers, but if hearing to the presentation and looking at it, I think it's a good fundament, and it shows a good roadmap on how Indonesia can go towards a neutral CO2 situation in 2060. Maybe Indonesia can move up or speed up a little bit more to jointly reach our goals. But that's more like a challenge, a remark, nothing less than that.
Okay. So speed up. I know it's a challenge already, and to speed up, I would be happy to see Indonesia in the forefront. But let's see. I wish the best, and thanks again, Ibu Verika and Ibu Kamia for the presentation. We have so many questions here already for the four of the speakers. So there will be a lot of chance that you will need to still answer a lot of questions here. So, so maybe first let me ask Ibu Kamia, Ibu Verika, while preparing the Indonesian carbon pricing scheme, did you also take into account any insights and feedback from the Indonesian industry players? How can you ensure not only the state-owned but also the private sectors will comply to this policy? I think that's a very good question. Maybe Ibu Verika, you want to start?
Yeah, actually we are still discussing about what should we do, what will be the mechanism and the arrangement. So it is difficult to answer, but actually we on tariff we are now discussing about how much that make the industry will interested in the scheme. And beside the arrangement on the trading and also the tax, we preparing like a companion policy to make and to help the especially power generation sector to shift their investment from fossil fuel base and to the renewable energy. And beyond that policy, I think we are still discussing. So I'm sorry, I cannot answer it beyond what we have already discussed in the government yet. But the involvement of the private sector and also the other stakeholders, of course, is very important. And we realize that in designing the mechanism and arrangement, the one who will be the subject in the market are very important. And in the development, we will of course create engagements with all the stakeholders, including the private sectors.
Okay, so now it's still in discussion, if I understand correctly, but then we will also have like a companion policy regulation to make sure the private sectors can also be in line in it, right? Any addition from Ibu Kamia?
Yeah, maybe before to that, I would just like to respond regarding the if Indonesia can be sooner than 2060. Yeah. So actually from the document that Indonesia already submitted to the UN, it says that 2060 or sooner. So in the context of the power sector, our exit from coal is planned, the maximum is in 2056 because we have the current contract with the private sector. But if there is support, like financial support, we can make it earlier. There is a mechanism, so-called energy transition mechanism. So recently during the COP26, PLN has signed MOU with the Asian Development Bank to do the full feasibility study on how to retire coal earlier. So there will be some financing mechanism that we can do to make it happen. So if it is happen, the support is there, then it is possible to be carbon neutral earlier than 2060. Regarding the how to make private sector compliance, I think what have been done by the Ministry of Energy during the last 3 years. As I mentioned before, since 2017, we have started talking about emission trading, cap and trade system. And PLN always be involved by the Ministry of Energy. So that's why when we have the trial, we had the trial this year even before the regulation were in place. So I think as long as the socialization or the capacity building and the engagement with the private sector are in place and conducted as what has been done by the Ministry of Energy and also the Ministry of Finance, before the regulation were issued, I think the private sector will have time to prepare and will have time to prepare and then will be able to comply with the regulations.
Thank you, Ibu Kamia. And we also have 2 more questions for Paul and Richard. The first one is, how can the Dutch government finance the budget of the carbon tax system, providing subsidy, building infrastructure, etc.? So probably it's for Paul. And the next question, I think I will tell later after you answer it.
Yeah, I think it's a very valid question again, very relevant also. This discussion is still ongoing. So the subsidy scheme is financed through an energy surcharge on the energy taxation in the Netherlands. So it's paid by companies who purchase energy, gas and electricity, and also consumers. And the balance of who pays more to finance that subsidy scheme was subject to a big discussion. In the end, we ended up with 2/3 by the company and 1/3 by the consumers. And this is, of course, a very difficult decision. You can imagine the different priorities at stake here. And then also there's recently the Dutch government financed 7 billion extra euros for climate action, of which 4 billion actually goes into the subsidy scheme. And those funds are not financed through this surcharge, but they come from the general budget, meaning that they are paid through general taxes, labor charges, added value tax. So there's a big discussion on the polluter pays principle without actually creating such a high burden on energy costs for companies and consumers, so that there's a limit, and then we have to go through the general budget.
Okay, so it's both from customers, the companies, and also there is some parts of it also from the general budget. So it's a combination of many things to make things happen to reduce carbon. The next question is COVID impact. So could you share with us if there are any impacts of the COVID pandemic in the carbon tax system? How does the industry players react? Probably it relates to many things, right? Fuel price and also demand is reducing. Any experience probably from Richard when COVID started last year to today? Any big impact to the implementation of this to industry or?
what we have experienced in our area, because when COVID came in on the 15th of March last year, we were in close contact with the companies in our region to see, okay, what's the impact? But yeah, we did not experience any decrease in production output or anything like that. So production-wise, no impact. What we have seen, but nevertheless, of course, companies needed to take actions, of course, for COVID. So that was a big challenge of how can you make sure that you produce those products with the right people and with all the different measurements. But no, actually no deep impact of COVID.
So it's more about the logistics, how to produce, right? Because of course you cannot have 100% capacity, full of people. Maybe you just have to change shift. But then in terms of carbon emissions and production, you didn't see any significant.
No, not in our region, but of course I also know that, for instance, the automotive, what you have seen is that they stopped orders. Okay. With the chips, they said, okay, stop. And then the market picked up again. And now you have a lot of long production lead times.
Okay.
But that's more a general remark. But in our region, I don't have not clear examples of that. There was a dramatic output failure or anything like that.
Okay.
No.
Yeah. And for the Netherlands in general?
I think it's a very good answer. I think nationally, if you look at production levels, they did decrease in certain sectors a little bit, but the recovery has been quite quick, and we're actually already above production levels before. I do think that it has, at least on a global level, global supply chains have been frustrated by the lockdown measures that have been taken everywhere, which has impacted, I think, some sectors more than others. And in a certain way, the energy crisis that we see right now also was exacerbated a little bit through the COVID crisis, through many different avenues. So I think the high energy prices did really have a huge impact on industry, or are still having a huge impact. So, but it's not a one-to-one link.
Okay, all right. So we still have time for one more question. Audience want to have Please, Pak, for the last question.
Thank you, Ibu Moderator, for the opportunity. Thank you, Paul and Richard, for your presentation. Ibu Kamia and Ibu Verike, terima kasih atas presentasinya. My name is Sabat. I'm the trade attaché of the Indonesian Embassy. So I'm just a bit curious about the impact of this carbon tax and trading on trade issues. From the perspective of industry, for example, if I'm a business person, if there is a new regulations, of course, I need to put more inputs. I need to put more infrastructure to comply to this regulation, which in time, that can affect the production costs and also affect my price in the market. And automatically, the Dutch industry, the domestic Dutch industry, they will start to viewing the import product, whether they have the same treatment, whether they have the same tax also, which is fair enough. Then, Paul, you mentioned that there is a new implementation of CBAM, the carbon border adjustment mechanisms, which would tax the import products from outside the Netherlands. What I'm asking is there any consideration from the Dutch government, because you are trying to make this a level playing field, but unfortunately, the country that export their products to the Netherlands is not also in the same level. Like there is also a developed country which can, comply with the regulation, but the developing country and the least developing country is also quite difficult if you starting to impose the carbon tax for their export products, because in times it's also, a bit contradictory to the GSP regulation that EU is also giving some easiness for the developing country and also a least developed country to export to the EU, also to the Netherlands. So there is a bit contradictory regulation. In one part, the Dutch government imposed the carbon tax. On the other part, they are trying to help developing country to come, their products to come to the Netherlands. That's my first question. And the second question is, maybe Paul can address this, or also Ibu Verike, that Indonesia right now is also implementing the carbon tax and trading system also. Quite similar with the Dutch government right now. Is there any mechanism between countries that already implement this kind of regulation to avoid, double carbon taxation? If the Dutch government impose the carbon tax for the import product from Indonesia, they already tax in Indonesia. So there are double taxation, which in the end create difficulties for the industry, both in Indonesia and the Netherlands, and also the end consumers will pay more price for the products they consume. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak. Good question. First, on fairness, right? You're protecting the EU, but how about other countries? That's the first question to you. And second is the mechanism to avoid double taxation.
I think the points you raised are very, very valid, and it's a very difficult question to answer as well, because on the one hand, we do see the climate change happening faster and mitigation efforts lacking. There's a big gap between the two. So we do need to amp up the efforts. So the European Union has decided to increase the efforts, and many other countries have done as well. But on the other hand, we also need to protect our industries in the EU. And on the other hand, we need to help other countries as well. So we have increased our climate financing as the European Union, and we are also having a lot of other discussions with other countries to help them in their efforts. So I think it's a little bit of a push and pull. It's a little bit contradictory. I wouldn't say that. I would just say that we're trying to find a balance between how far can we push and where can we pull. So I agree with most of the dilemmas that you presented there. And I think it will be an ongoing discussion on how to move forward with measures like these happening across the world. And on the second question on avoiding double taxation, this is a bit of a technical question that I will elaborate on. Is the proposal for the carbon border adjustment mechanism has a correction for domestically paid carbon taxes, meaning that you only have to pay for the difference between the pricing when you're importing. So let's say in Indonesia the price at one point is $10, and in the EU it would be still around 80. Then the importer would have to pay $70 additional. So the level playing field within the EU is still at the same taxation level without it being double. So we do think that this actually helps companies within the EU industry, so they always know which price to pay, whether or not they're paying on an imported product or domestically produced products.
Okay. Oh, that's quite a straightforward math, right? Just to see the delta basically from one carbon or one carbon tax to the others. All right, Ibu Verike and Ibu Kamia, any addition to that question from Indonesian perspective, or you think it's clear already from what Paul has just answered?
Yeah, from the government of Indonesia perspective, we see that we still wait and see on the CBM initiatives, because I think it is fair enough in certain level, but we see that it will cause also, it has to face some problems on the level of playing field, and also maybe the regulation on discrimination on trade. And so we see that the information on the CBM is still very limited because it is also under discussion. So what we can do is to analyze what is the possible impact on us. I think it is depend on the how it will be imposed on the products and what coverage, what coverage, because maybe there are only certain products that are traded with EU, but we also consider that the initiative may also affects on the trade not only between Indonesia and EU, but EU with other countries, and will also impact us in indirectly. So again, it will depends on the final result on the discussion on the CBAM itself. Thank you, Ibu Mutia.
Thank you, Ibu Ferika. Ibu Kamia, any additional remarks?
Yeah, I think Bu Ferika already explained in the perspective of the government. What we see from PLN, I think, because PLN also have the carbon credits, yeah, and we offer the carbon credits to private sector, and we see that more companies are requesting this credit. So I guess maybe there is something to do, or some relations with the CBAM, probably. I guess, because we receive more requests from industry on carbon credits. Yeah.
Thank you. So I think that was all questions for today, and also the sessions, both the first session and the second session. Many thanks to all speakers. Many thanks to Paul van Baal for your presentation, answers, enthusiasm, also from you, Richard Middle from Groningen Seaports. Many thanks for Ibu Ferika Indah Arika from Kemenkeu, and also Ibu Kamia Handayani from PLN. I hope this session is fruitful, that you can learn a lot of things from this session, and also to bridge the insights and also the knowledge sharing between Indonesia and the Netherlands. And I hope, that we can see you again next year, hopefully for the next webinar. And until then, please stay safe and healthy. Mutia, I'll give it back to the MC to close the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ibu Mutia, as the moderators, and also for Paul and Richard for the speakers. Let's give them a round of applause again. And also thank you untuk Ibu Ferika dan untuk Ibu Kamia yang setelah menghadiri dari Jakarta melalui virtual. Before we close this event, we are going to have a few words from the Pak Raymond Frediansa, Chairman of IA-ITB Chapter Netherlands. We will also have a surprise for us as a booklet launching. Pak Raymond, please come to the stage.
Thanks for the time and opportunity. First of all, I would like to say thank you. I think we really had a very nice discussion today. It was very interesting. I think we learned a lot, and hopefully then we can bring up this to Indonesia as well, these learnings. As it is already lunchtime, I will try to make it as short as possible. Good afternoon, everybody. Distinguished Ambassador of the Republic of Indonesia to the Netherlands, His Excellency Bapak Mayerfas, distinguished speakers both in the Netherlands and in Indonesia, especially also for the speakers who really came from The Hague probably, and also from Groningen to be able to attend this event together with us over here in this location. Distinguished INTPF committees and participants, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I am very happy and honored to address this remark at the closing event of INTPF this year at this beautiful venue in Utrecht. INTPF, Indonesia, the Netherlands Technology Partnership Forum, has been set up as a multi-year collaboration project between IA-ITB Netherlands and Indonesian Embassy in The Hague. And this year it is also fully supported by Energy Academy Indonesia. I see that the representative of Energy Academy Indonesia are here together with us as well. This year we chose the topic of sustainable energy as the focus of INTPF 2021, and we had the main theme of bridging the gap and harnessing sustainable energy. We started with INTPF Symposium in December last year as an opening event addressing experience-based learnings from ongoing initiatives and collaborations between Indonesia and the Netherlands in this area. Lessons learned about gaps, challenges, hurdles, opportunities in establishing partnerships in sustainable energy businesses in Indonesia were shared and discussed in that symposium. As a follow-up to that symposium, several discussion online webinars and web talks were organized this year to create further opportunities and learnings by zooming into selected topics in sustainability and sustainable energy technologies. 5 series of webinars were successfully held this year with varying emerging topics in renewable energy sectors, specifically hydrogen technology and economy, ocean battery and energy storage, and electric vehicle charging. In the 4th webinar, we also organized an interesting discussion session on energy efficient data centers using immersion cooling technology. Bear in mind that besides renewable energy implementation, energy efficiency measures are the next important mitigation for CO2 emission reduction globally. And as the closing webinar of this year, we have just followed and finished a very nice discussion on how the carbon tax and trading systems may help industries and companies in reducing their carbon footprint. All this webinar series covered the learnings and opportunities from both countries, the Netherlands and Indonesia. To capture and highlight all the learnings from these INTPF events done this year, we summarized them in the form of a booklet that is available. I think you've seen all this booklet as well in front of you for the participants here. You can read it there. You can also bring that home. We also have online of this booklet available. And I think we have the link. Maybe the operator can share the link of the INTPF booklet that you can download. You can also view online, digitally. I am very hopeful and also confident at the same time that this collaboration technology forum will highly contribute to future potential research collaboration, investment deals, and long-term partnerships between Indonesia and the Netherlands in the years to come. To conclude my remarks, I would like to express my sincere appreciation and thanks to all organizing committees of INTPF for their great effort and excellent teamwork, that despite the challenge of the global pandemic situation, these programs were successfully held this year. Also, my sincere gratitude to all collaborating and supporting partners, Indonesian Embassy in The Hague, ECADIN, and IA-ITB in Jakarta. And last but not least, to all stakeholders and speakers who have greatly contributed to these INTPF programs, I thank you. And I wish you all a good rest of the day in the Netherlands and a good evening in Indonesia. See you in the next INTPF events in 2022. Stay healthy and strong. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Raymond. And that's a wrap to our sessions, to our event today. And so we are hopeful that these discussions, not only these webinars, but also the previous webinars, can be a trigger for a future cooperations between Indonesia and the Netherlands, especially in sustainable energy sectors. So I am on behalf of the Embassy and IA-ITB and all the organizing committee, I would like to say thank you very much for all the speakers, for the moderators, and also for the participants, whether you are participating through here live in the thread or also via Zoom and also YouTube. We are thank you very much for your participations, and we are looking forward for further discussions. So you all can also download the INTPF booklet, and the links will be provided by the committee. So that's a wrap, and I would like to say thank you, stay safe, and stay healthy. Goodbye. Tot ziens.